Welcome to the Unsolved Mystery YouTube channel and our exclusive series, JonBenet's Web Truths. On this evening's episode, we will be featuring the April 8th, 1999 CBS 48-hour special, Justice for JonBenet. But as we do, without any further ado, let's get right into this.
And the prosecutor.
I pray that it gets solved.
Tonight, new details about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey.
Did you ever consider each other?
No, absolutely not.
Her parents speak out in their own defense.
I don't know what happened. God knows, and he's not telling.
And a son defends his father against allegations of abuse.
There was never any abuse in my family. Zero. None.
Plus, this detective had a key role investigating the murder. Now, new charges that he was targeted for blackmail.
Do you believe it was blackmail?
I do.
Aaron Moriarty has the story of the pressure on one Boulder cop.
They wanted Steve to know that he better talk to them. He better come up with some information.
And does the Ramsey house still hold the clues to catching a killer?
I think someone either in the family or very, very close to the family committed this crime.
Bernard Goldberg tracks the case with a former FBI profiler. 2 years after the murder.
I'm getting very mad at what's been done to us, to my family, what hasn't been done to solve this crime. I'm angry.
A 48 hours investigation. Will there be justice for JonBenet? This is a story of murder that has been anything but a textbook case. Good evening. More than 2 years after her death, the case of JonBenet Ramsey continues to intrigue and to trouble a good many people. Not in all the journals and legal documents found here or in any law library are you likely to find a precedent to explain all that has happened in this very strange case. We've conducted our own investigation. And tonight, we hope to shed some light to go with all the heat. The district attorney has now requested a 6-month extension for the grand jury, which convened in September, but it may not be needed. 48 Hours has learned that deliberations could begin in about a week, and the panel of 4 men and 8 women might even wrap up their work by later this month. But will there be an indictment for murder? If so, against whom? Will there be justice for JonBenet Ramsey? From day one in this case, there's been a wealth of scorn and suspicion aimed at her parents. Bill Lagatuda begins tonight with John and Patsy Ramsey in their own defense in a murder case that has not gone by the book.
Because we're the parents, we're the murderers? Is that the thesis? It's sad if that's what we think as a society.
They may be one of the most hated couples in America.
We felt like she was a gift given to us. Her eyes were incredible. She would almost look through you into your soul.
Polls tell us most Americans believe John and Patsy Ramsey were involved in the death of their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet. They have always denied it.
I can't believe we're even having to answer this question. I mean, it's just so ludicrous. All I know is we didn't do it. I don't know what happened. God knows, and he's not telling.
You remember the Frankenstein movies where the people are out with torches coming up the hill to find Dr. Frankenstein? That's how we feel. That's who's out there coming at us. These people with torches. Yeah, let's get them, get them, get them.
That may be the one fact in this story no one disputes. The media did descend like a mob on the Ramseys from the beginning. Television, newspapers, especially the tabloids, found in the wealthy parents people everyone loved to hate. The shocking murder of a 6-year-old in this house in Boulder, Colorado, the day after Christmas 1996, has become the great American whodunit, with John and Patsy Ramsey as the main characters.
We're no different than any normal family. And look what's happened to us. It could happen to you. It's scary.
The Ramseys have never been charged or officially even been called suspects. But they say they felt great pressure from the Boulder authorities, and the media hounding was relentless.
We've been chased all the time.
The Ramseys decided to escape Boulder and flew to Atlanta, their old hometown, to bury their daughter. They bought a house, and John Ramsey, a successful businessman, started a new company. Their son Burke, who was 9 when his sister was murdered, entered a private school. Of course, the Boulder police didn't forget about them, and neither did the media.
There were hidden cameras at the gravesite. There were reporters in the bushes. So I have never felt comfortable in just going out and spending time at the gravesite.
Last year, the Ramseys agreed to be interviewed for a British documentary. 48 Hours obtained exclusive rights to the more than 5 hours of talks, which took place over 2 days. Although the Ramseys placed no restrictions on the questions asked, the interviews were hardly confrontational.
I came back from that interview and, you know, my family would say, well, what are they like? You know, do they have horns? And I said, you know, they appear to be just ordinary folk.
The maker of the documentary was journalism professor Michael Tracy. He agrees with the Ramseys that the media, in this case, turned into a lynch mob.
The story that was told was that either John or Patsy or both killed JonBenet.
When you went into this interview, how did you feel about the Ramseys in terms of their guilt or innocence?
I like to think, and I'm not fantasizing here. I didn't have a view on the crime. I don't know who killed JonBenet. To this day, I don't know who killed JonBenet, any more than anyone else does, as far as I can see.
Tracy, who is now a consultant for 48 Hours, did ask a question many have wanted to ask the Ramseys since the day of the murder.
Did you ever consider each other?
No.
Absolutely not.
This interview is the only time the Ramseys have told their entire story. A story of a kidnapping, then a murder they have always denied being part of.
If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And I remember praying that over her that night as I tucked her in.
Then, they say, they all went to sleep. Patsy Ramsey says she went downstairs first on the morning of the 26th of December and says when she reached the bottom step, she found a bizarre 3-page ransom note saying her daughter had been kidnapped. She says she screamed to her husband.
Somebody asked me later what was the worst moment in all of this, and that was the worst moment. Was suddenly realizing that someone had your daughter, your child, and has taken her, and she was gone, and we didn't know where she was.
Then, they say, they called the police.
You know, I was just frantic on the phone. You know, they've kidnapped our daughter. Our daughter's been kidnapped. Our daughter's been kidnapped.
But the ransom note had explicitly warned, quote, speaking to anyone about your situation, such as the police or the FBI, will result in your daughter being beheaded, unquote. Later on, people would ask, how could they have made that call if they really thought their daughter had been kidnapped and would be killed if they involved the police?
Well, I can remember Patsy saying, what should we do? You know, it says not to call the police. I just call the police. We had no choice. I mean, I would have gone mad sitting there hoping someone would call. Would have gone absolutely mad. What was going through my mind was, what do we do? Can we set up roadblocks? Can we close the airport?
Right.
I mean, I've said before, I would call out the National Guard if I could have. That's what you were trying to have accomplished. How do we shut this city down and
Look door to door.
Find her.
When the police arrived at the house, an initial search turned up nothing. But some 8 hours later,
I was asked to take a friend and go through the house and see if there's anything that looked unusual or out of place. And we started in the basement.
John Ramsey says his search ended when he found his daughter, JonBenet, in a storeroom.
There's a white blanket, and her eyes were closed. I feared the worst, but yet I'd found her.
Then John Ramsey picked up JonBenet's body, carried her upstairs and laid her down in front of the family Christmas tree.
We walked into the living room, and she was there, and John said, she's gone.
For more than 2 years, this has been one of the most infamous addresses in all of America. The house where JonBenet Ramsey was brutally killed. Her body found behind this wall in the basement the day after Christmas, 1996.
This case deserves that we do the very best we can. I pray that it gets solved.
You're looking at rare pictures inside the Ramseys' house, part of a British documentary made after the family moved out.
There is going to be accountability in this case, I promise you.
There are no arrests pending in this case.
But after all this time, nearly 28 months, we still don't know if it was an intruder who broke into the house and killed JonBenet, or for some still unknown reason, it was someone in her own family.
Parents are involved quite often in child homicides. No one should overlook parents as suspects ever in these cases. We need to...
Greg McCrary is a former FBI profiler, an expert on why certain types of people commit certain types of crimes.
The probability of a stranger committing this crime is remote. I think someone either in the family or very, very close to the family committed this crime. There's just too much familiarity with the crime and the crime scene.
At one point early in the investigation, McCrary was asked to join the Ramsey defense team. He declined.
Whoever took this child apparently spent time wiping down the body, took time to get a pad and a pen from the house and write a note, start and complete a second note that's about 3 pages long.
Why couldn't an intruder do that?
It's very, very unlikely. Stranger intruders, when they come in to abduct a child, they're in and they're out.
Certainly for the first several months, virtually all of us thought that it was the parents.
Including you? Uh-huh. Sherry Keene Osborne writes for Newsweek. She's been on the story from day one.
We spent a week interviewing them. If I had to absolutely say right now what I thought, I would say that it was not the parents. Therefore, that only leaves an intruder.
A special kind of intruder, she believes, fitting the profile of a sadistic pedophile.
The sort of guy that gets his jollies out of high risk, who wanders around in the house, who almost taunts the people.
Whether that theory is true or not, Greg McCrary says suspicions about the Ramseys' involvement may be well-founded.
The Ramseys' behavior itself brought a lot of speculation on about their potential involvement in this crime.
For example, police thought they were unhelpful, even evasive.
The common behavior of victim parents in a situation like this is that not only will they talk to the police, you can hardly get them out of your hair.
But the Ramseys didn't grant police an official interview until months after the murder, after they hired lawyers, separate lawyers, supposedly on the advice of a family friend. Does that sound odd to you?
Separate attorneys, to me, almost speaks of a conflict of interest. In other words, why couldn't one attorney represent both of them if their interests were the same?
The day the crime was discovered, John and Patsy Ramsey were not treated as suspects, not at first anyway. Thinking the case was a kidnapping, the Boulder police treated them as victims. And that was only the first of what many now say were a number of serious police mistakes that day.
They were interviewed together. And they were not separated, for any interview, so that was a mistake.
And police allowed the house, the crime scene, to be contaminated. They allowed friends who were called by the Ramseys to wander wherever they wanted. One, trying to tidy up the house, actually started cleaning the kitchen, possibly destroying evidence.
Someone at one point picked up 409 and was scrubbing down the counters.
There was more. When an initial search of the house came up empty, the lead detective actually asked John Ramsey and a friend of his to keep looking on their own, a decision that allowed for the contamination of the very room where JonBenet's body would later be found.
That's a police function. They should have searched that house.
If the crime scene is not intact, contaminated,
Doesn't matter what we do. You cannot decontaminate.
All this worries Dr. Henry Lee, a forensic scientist famous even before he testified in the O.J. Simpson case.
I'm here as a scientist. Look at a scientific issue.
Lee was brought into the Ramsey case by Boulder DA Alex Hunter.
Unless we know the past, very difficult to find. What's the future going to be?
1:05 in the afternoon, John Ramsey located his daughter's body in this room, in the basement. Her body wrapped in a blanket, her skull fractured. There was a boot print near JonBenet and a palm print on a door nearby. Neither has ever been identified. And there was something more, DNA, under her fingernails and in her underwear.
The DNA under her fingernails and on her underwear match. They belong to the same person. They don't belong to any of her family, any of her friends, anyone that they've been able to identify as yet.
But what about the fact that there were no signs of forced entry? Well, it turns out there would have been no need, because that night at least one door was left unlocked, at least 6 windows were open, and the house alarm, it wasn't turned on that night. Greg McCreary thinks it's interesting, but he says it doesn't prove an intruder killed JonBenet.
What we have to go with is go back to the basics, and that is that we've got a child killed in the house, staging, the writing of the note. Those are the significant issues that we have to assign weight to.
We need a good crime scene. We need physical evidence. We need good detective work. We need little luck. Meanwhile, this case, we're still waiting for some break.
To prove in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt that anyone had killed this child, I think is going to be a difficult thing to prove.
Difficult because anyone who might know what happened isn't talking, and a house once so full of clues now stands empty, yielding nothing but ghosts from a Christmas past.
Hello, I'm Patsy Ramsey, and we'd like to welcome you to our home and wish you a very Merry Christmas. Wave JonBenet.
Just ahead,
Do you believe it was blackmail?
I do.
the pressure on a key investigator in the Ramsey murder.
They wanted Steve to know that they were a force out there that he had to deal with.
New charges of blackmail.
One of the situation as backing him into a corner.
Next.
This is a tragedy.
Who could have done it?
There were no visible signs of forced entry.
Who killed JonBenet Ramsey?
It is a sad reality in America.
Why aren't the parents angry?
The Ramseys have suffered a terrible loss.
They've got a dead daughter, and they're entitled to grieve.
That a family's nightmare
And suddenly the media descended on Boulder.
can be an editor's dream. The Ramsey story became a bestseller, especially for tabloid newspapers like The Globe, which, according to its former researcher,
Well, there was constant pressure.
was willing to do just about anything to keep it that way.
When I started working for the Globe, I thought there would be some amusing tactics and some slightly unethical tactics, but I never fathomed that I would ever be a part of anything that could be construed as remotely criminal.
Jeff Shapiro was 23 and fresh out of college when this man, Tony Frost, the executive editor of The Globe, offered to send him to Boulder.
We'll rent you a new car and put you in an apartment at our expense. There was no way to say no.
Shapiro was paid more to cover the case
I make over $50,000 a year.
than most of the cops investigating it. He soon discovered how he would earn it
I used to call it home sweet home because I'd come here so much.
by using rather unorthodox methods to get leads.
And I watched all the activities that they had in front of the house with a pair of binoculars, watching the police conduct some of their reenactments of the crime scene from this tree.
Why in the tree?
So they wouldn't see me.
Because any major scoop, like this one, when the Globe bought stolen crime scene photos,
These are not autopsy photographs. These are photographs that illustrate the information that has already been released.
could kick up circulation by more than 250,000 readers. The pressure on Shapiro was intense.
I was constantly reminded if I couldn't come up with a story that, maybe they didn't really need me there. I always had to get a lead, and if I couldn't get a lead, then I couldn't stay.
But by last summer,
It was a nightmare. It was almost impossible to come up with anything new.
until suddenly, a lead detective on the case resigned. At first, the Globe and other tabloids tried to buy his information.
If you could develop Steve Thomas as a source, and a good one, you can know this case in ways that no one else could.
Steve probably knew more about the Ramsey case than anyone else at the time.
Peg Miller is
Because
Steve
he had worked
Thomas's
so
friend
long
and
in the
attorney.
end. Several tabloids approached him and offered him money.
How much money?
I heard the figure go up over time to as high as $100,000.
$100,000?
Right.
What was his reaction to that?
He said absolutely not.
That's when Shapiro says a Globe editor came up with another way to get Steve to cooperate.
I didn't know anything about it until I was talking to one of my editors on the phone.
Shapiro says for his own protection, he began taping phone conversations with his editors. He let us listen to some. During this call last August, Globe editor Joe Mullins said he had a file on Detective Thomas's personal life.
Grandmother, mother, and grandfather, Josephine, Pat, Dodie, and Bill, while living in Austin, Texas.
Mullins also said he uncovered a sensitive secret about the health of someone in Thomas's family, which he described on tape, but we won't reveal.
I don't want you talking about this to anybody.
No, I would never do that. I would never, I wouldn't want something like that to get out.
What did Mullins intend to do with the information?
I'm not sure that this is even a story for us, but it was something that I thought I might use to get an interview with him,
How so?
Well, I'm sure he wouldn't want it published, would he?
Had your employer ever done that to your knowledge before? Collected information on a cop or a DA in order to force them into becoming a source?
No, I was literally stunned.
And then, last August, the National Enquirer beat them on a story.
We've had our asses kicked by the Enquirer. Very embarrassing. Extremely embarrassing, all right? Everybody should feel as embarrassed as I do about it.
You are listening to the voice of Globe executive editor Tony Frost.
Maybe we're not being clever enough about how we get to people,
In another phone conversation taped by Jeff Shapiro.
Steve Thomas, maybe we're not being clever enough there.
Again, the plan to pressure Steve Thomas is raised, this time by Craig Lewis, the Globe staff reporter based in Boulder.
This thing about Thomas's family, when Joe and I were talking yesterday, that kind of decided that was the best way to get into him. It's sort of a situation of backing him into a corner in a nice way.
But Frost sounded concerned the plan could backfire.
You could, that can work either way,
And suggested telling Thomas how much the Globe and the police have in common.
The plus we have is that Globe, and Tony Frost in particular, have more reason to go for the Ramseys than the police have.
After that, there's about a 4-minute gap in the tape Shapiro gave us, so we don't know exactly what was said. What we do know is that shortly after this phone call, Craig Lewis went ahead and delivered a packet of family materials to Steve Thomas. Later, Lewis told a newspaper he just thought Thomas would like to see the photos. But Thomas's attorney says there's only one way to interpret what the Globe did.
I believe I even said to Craig Lewis, I think what you're doing is blackmail.
Do you believe it was blackmail?
I do.
Why?
Because they went out of their way to put together a whole file on Steve. They wanted Steve to know that they were a force out there that he had to deal with, and that they had some kind of power over him, and that he better talk to them.
As for Shapiro, he admits he also went to see Detective Thomas, but not to threaten him, he says, but to warn him of the Globe's plan.
Do you believe that?
I believe that he went to Steve to get a story from him, and he was going to use whatever he could to get a story and to get information.
Whatever his involvement, last October, Shapiro took his tapes to the Denver office of the FBI, whose agents then called Thomas.
They just told Steve that they had some information that the Globe was trying to blackmail him or get information from him? And did he want them to pursue an investigation against the Globe?
And what did Steve say?
Steve said, no, I want to be left alone.
The Globe refused our request for an interview and instead sent 48 Hours a series of letters threatening to sue CBS News if we broadcast the taped telephone conversations. In these letters, the Globe does not deny an attempt to pressure Detective Thomas, but it claims it contacted the FBI and that the agency confirmed that the Globe was not the target of any criminal investigation. As for Shapiro, he continued working for the Globe until February, when he was fired.
There will be people who listen to you to say, so much of what you did bothered you, and yet you kept working.
Right.
You didn't quit.
Right.
It's a pretty seductive world, isn't it, though? It's hard to leave. The
It's
money.
sickening. I mean, everything that I've seen completely lacks any moral standing. I've often told people that people in the tabloid world are not necessarily immoral, they're amoral.
But that includes you, Jeff, because you were part of it.
That's true.
Coming up,
He's the most caring father in the world.
defending a father against allegations of abuse.
He has never, ever abused us in any way, physically, sexually, or emotionally.
Just ahead. During more than 2 years of investigations in the JonBenet Ramsey case, many people have come under suspicion. But so far, no one has been officially described as a suspect in the murder. Investigators have built a case file some 30,000 pages thick. They have formally interviewed close to 600 people. Of those, 68 have been looked at as possible suspects. Cleared in the case officially are John Ramsey's grown children, John Andrew and Melinda. Through it all, the umbrella of suspicion, say the police, still hovers over the parents, John and Patsy Ramsey. Here again is Bill Legatuda.
I'm mad now. I'm getting very mad at looking back at what's been done to us, to my family, what hasn't been done to solve this crime. I'm angry.
In that interview, which aired on British television, John and Patsy Ramsey got to give, pretty much unchallenged, their version of the murder investigation. According to the Ramseys, they were not uncooperative with the police or the district attorney's office. They did give hair and DNA samples and handwriting samples to compare with the infamous ransom note. If you believe the Ramseys, then you have to believe the police were out to get them.
They were there to hang us. And we became very suspicious, defensive, untrusting.
Both the Boulder Police and the District Attorney's Office declined our request for an interview. The Ramseys say they began to mistrust the investigators shortly after their daughter's murder, when they were told by a friend.
Your daughter was ransomed twice last week, once by the kidnapper and once by the police. And here's what happened. They refused to release her body for burial unless you submitted first to an interrogation of the police department. And we said, oh boy, the worm has turned. What are these people about? And it changed the whole chemistry and how we looked at the police. They were not there to help us, they were there to hang us.
Number 16, JonBenet Ramsey.
Some believe the negative feeling toward the Ramseys came from those images of their daughter's beauty pageants. The theory was anyone who put their 6-year-old daughter on stage in a sexy costume is not a parent to be trusted.
It just, people are just, you know, they're trying to find something. They try to zero in on something. Oh, hey, here, she went to the doctor more than twice a year, so let's pick on that. You know, oh, he traveled to Amsterdam, must be pornography. You know, I mean, it's sick. It is sick, sick, sick.
In the interview, the Ramseys said they felt particularly persecuted by the rumors of physical or sexual abuse leveled against them. Yes, the autopsy suggested JonBenet had been sexually assaulted that night, in addition to being bludgeoned and strangled. But after more than 2 years of investigations by the police and by the media, no history of physical or sexual abuse by either John or Patsy Ramsey has ever been uncovered.
At the heart of all the media coverage, overwhelmingly, is a very basic argument that JonBenet was a sexually abused child. First, what is your general reaction to that large allegation?
Well, it's disgusting to even have to respond to that. It's absolutely false. I don't know how to be more strong about that. Nothing could be further from the truth. Absolutely, utterly false.
John Ramsey says his entire family was besieged. Police looked at his older son from a previous marriage, first as a suspect, and then to answer questions about whether he had been abused by his father. Police have cleared the son. John Andrew Ramsey spoke off camera for the documentary, as did his sister Melinda Ramsey, who was also questioned by police.
He has never, ever abused us in any way, physically, sexually, or emotionally.
There was never any abuse in my family. Zero. None. Never.
But what about Patsy Ramsey and the theory that she killed her daughter in a fit of anger that night because JonBenet had wet her bed?
It is so minuscule in the big... Does someone actually think I would kill my child because she wet the bed? I mean, I have lived through stage 4 cancer. In the grand scheme of things, bedwetting is not important.
And later on 48 Hours...
What I can tell America is there is a sick madman in your midst that you haven't caught yet. Wake up.
Still ahead.
Let's look for a phrase.
This handwriting expert helped crack the Unabomber case, but does he know who wrote the ransom note in the Ramsey murder?
It's diction and phrases and so forth.
Reading between the lines. Next.
I just started downstairs. There were these pieces of paper lying on the stair.
Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully.
It said, "We have your daughter, you know, your daughter."
And if you want to see her in 1997,
I screamed.
You don't know what to do. You know, what do we do?
you must follow our instructions to the letter.
What shocked me was the idea that someone would go into a stranger's home and commit a crime as horrific as this particular crime, and then sit down in the kitchen and write out 2 pages.
When they first heard a ransom note had been found,
here you have a small letter D that ends with an upward stroke and then a tick.
It is somewhat distinctive.
handwriting experts John and Paul Osborne were sure that the 370-word trail would lead straight to the killer of JonBenet Ramsey.
It would be among the most primary pieces of evidence in trying to identify who it was that committed the crime.
After all, there was another famous child murder.
The murder of the Lindbergh baby.
The Lindbergh baby kidnapping case.
These various notes are Hoffman's admission and
where ransom notes were key.
There wasn't just one ransom note. There were 12 or 13 of them.
Did your father actually analyze this?
Yes, it was.
Paul's father and grandfather, pioneers in handwriting analysis, identified the writer of the ransom notes, Bruno Hauptmann,
Didn't you write on the note? I did not.
who was later convicted in court.
My grandfather and my father, they both testified. The evidence was really quite overwhelming.
Unfortunately, in the Ramsey case, the ransom note hasn't been the big break authorities hoped for.
Why?
Simply because no one has clearly been identified as the writer of the note.
The problem is this. While JonBenet Ramsey's father has been excluded as the author of the note, that's not the case with her mother. Sources tell 48 Hours that 2 analysts hired by the Ramsey family have ruled out Patsy Ramsey as the author. But state experts contend, while they can't say with certainty she wrote the note, they can't eliminate her either.
They cannot make a determination one way or the other.
The reason may be that the author of the ransom note disguised his or her handwriting.
The note begins in a fashion which could be described as writing that is more slowly executed and ends up with writing that appears to be more rapidly and freely executed.
Either someone has disguised their handwriting sufficiently enough to confuse these handwriting analysts, or the police haven't found the right person.
I would say that that's a pretty good synopsis of the situation.
Today, Ramsey case investigators may no longer be looking just to handwriting experts, but instead to this man. A man who believes it's not how you write,
It's diction and phrases and so forth.
but what you say that gives you away.
Free thee from the scandal of such senses as in the rancor.
Donald Foster, a literature professor at Vassar College in New York,
And in my book,
seen here in this 1995 CBS interview, volunteered to help the Ramsey case investigators.
let's look for a phrase, something like,
He uses computers to analyze the content of documents to determine who wrote them.
and we can simply do a search to find out where.
That's how, in 1995, he uncovered the anonymous writer of Primary Colors.
My name is Joe Klein, and I wrote Primary Colors.
And in 1997, tied Theodore Kaczynski to the Unabomber Manifesto.
After taking several words.
And then he turned to the Ramseys. Foster won't discuss his work in that case, but in trying to analyze the content of the ransom note, Foster had to contend with the fact that many of the phrases seem to be borrowed from the scripts of famous movies. Take the line, "If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies," sounds a lot like,
"If you talk to anyone, I don't care if it's a Pekingese pissing against the lamppost, the girl dies."
from the movie
girl
Dirty
okay?
Harry. How about the line, "Don't try to grow a brain, John," and from the movie Speed,
Jack, nothing tricky now. Do not attempt to grow a brain.
Foster took the movie references and all from the ransom note and compared them to the writings of possible suspects. Last summer, sources tell 48 Hours, Foster gave Ramsey investigators what no other expert has been able to do. He tied Patsy Ramsey to the ransom note.
But like everything else in this case, the story doesn't end there. We've learned that before Professor Foster started working with the Boulder authorities, he had a very different suspect in mind. Not Patsy Ramsey, but her stepson, John Andrew. It's a bizarre story that raises questions about Foster's credibility. A story that begins with the internet and this woman.
You know, I'm a stay-at-home housewife, bakes bread.
47-year-old Sue Bennett became fascinated with the Ramsey case and would spend hours online discussing it.
The threads are the topics that we're talking about for the day.
That's where she met Professor Foster.
They're talking about clues, homicide survivors.
Bennett says that in May of 1997, a writer using the screen name Jameson,
Jameson timeline, the ransom note is there.
who seemed to know a lot about the murder, caught Foster's attention.
So what was Donald Foster seeing on his computer?
He only saw posted by Jameson.
There were literally hundreds of statements posted by Jameson.
Jameson didn't mince words. He just comes out and says, the Ramseys are innocent. And Donald Foster saw one voice out of 100 who said, the Ramseys are innocent, I know this.
After spending some time analyzing Jameson's writings, Foster came to a startling conclusion, that Jameson was John Andrew Ramsey. More startling, that John Andrew might be the killer.
I mean, it's crazy.
Foster was so sure that in a letter to his literary agent, he bragged that he had solved this Colorado crime.
This text analyst from Vassar, you know, this well-respected professor, got it wrong.
How does Sue Bennett know?
I'm Jameson. There's never been another Jameson.
That's right, Sue Bennett is Jameson.
Somehow this man who can tell everything from analyzing text determined that I could murder a 6-year-old child with a garrote.
Foster responded to Bennett's accusations in a letter to 48 Hours, saying that he had just been speculating, that he had never publicly accused anyone of anything.
If he was wrong with all of my samples, I don't believe that there's any way that anyone should give him any credibility now judging Patsy Ramsey.
And Foster's credibility could become crucial if the grand jury acts on his report and indicts Patsy Ramsey. At that point, the 2.5-page ransom note would once again become the crucial piece of evidence.
Still to come.
I don't care if they believe me or not. My life has been ruined by the loss of my child.
The Ramseys remain defiant. That's next. One thing is certain about the JonBenet Ramsey murder case: a terrible injustice has been done for the last 2 years. If John and Patsy Ramsey are guilty, then so far they have gotten away with murder. But if they are not, then you have to believe that an innocent family has been cruelly hounded.
I don't care if they believe me or not. My life has been ruined by the loss of my child. What I can tell America is there is a sick madman in your midst that you haven't caught yet. Wake up.
Could be you tomorrow.
This could happen to any one of you.
It's frightening. I can't believe we're
Think
sitting
of going
here.
to sleep, thinking your children are safe in bed, that you're going to get up in the morning and have another wonderful day with them, and you get up and you find one of them murdered. You could be sitting here. We're no different than you. We love our children. You love your children. You should be frightened by what's happened to us.
Mark well, the question of innocence or guilt for John and Patsy Ramsey remains an open question. Under the law, as of this moment, they're not even accused citizens. They haven't been charged with anything. And even if the grand jury returns an indictment against the Ramseys or anyone else, there's no guarantee of a trial. It would still be up to prosecutors to take the case to court, something the DA has said he is reluctant to do unless he can be confident of a conviction. Many who are closely following the case doubt that there will ever be a conviction. You know, every year in this country, thousands of murders go unsolved. Not a handful of them get this much attention. The JonBenet Ramsey case has been a magnet for the media. Beautiful child, beautiful house, and plainly put, those pictures, which unfortunately some people find to be provocative. Whatever the outcome of this case, the intense spotlight used to scrutinize a murdered 6-year-old girl and her family reflects on all of us. And that is not such a pretty picture. What matters in this case, what matters in any murder case, is justice. And so far, there has been no justice for JonBenet Ramsey. That's 48 hours.
And that concludes tonight's airing of 48 Hours on the Unsolved Mystery YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this evening's presentation, please comment below and consider hitting the like, subscribe, and notification bell, as it helps our channel out significantly. So I hope to see some of you next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our next live premiere episode.
You may be able to help solve the mystery.